Just after I finished my ceramics course in Canberra, I was able to do some work in Victoria. One of the past students of Canberra School of Art had been working on the arts train in Victoria, and he wasn't going to be able to do it the next year, and so he was asking around for people with pottery background to take over his tutoring. I applied for it and got it, and I ended up doing 3 or 4 trips. This was in the late 70s. I did my ceramics course 76, 77. So 77 was the first year that I did any work on the arts train. Then 78 and 79 were the other trips. The program was run by the Council of Adult Education in Victoria. Their aim in doing it was to take arts, practical arts education to the regional areas that didn't have access. So the idea was to have tutors on the train running classes, practical classes in different forms of art, and people would come along and learn how to make art. The train used to do trips in spring and autumn, and it was out for 3 months. And over I can't remember now whether it was a 2 or 3 year period or something like that, they would cover the whole of regional Victoria. It was on a schedule. They had a schedule mapped out for each trip, and the train, which was just carriages, old rolling stock passenger carriages. They were clad on the outside in aluminium and on the inside with chipboard, so there's no windows or anything. It was just totally like a big tunnel. We used to say that we got tunnel syndrome from it. It was just hooked onto the back of freight trains, and the carriages would be dropped off in a siding somewhere where we were going to be, the towns we were going to be working in. The train was in that area for 4 to 5 days, so you had to be able to get things through. And that was a little bit of a trick with pottery, because pots need to be fully dry before they're fired for the bisque firing, and then they've got a glaze firing to go after that, and each firing can take 8 to 10 hours and have an 8 to 10 hour cooling cycle. So it made it quite tricky, and there was a way around it, and I'll get to that later. So the towns that we went to were sometimes, or nearly always, quite small. Be nothing to pull up to a town where there was a wheat silo, a couple of houses, maybe a pub, maybe not even a pub. We did go to some bigger centres. Hamilton was one of the biggest that I went to. People travelled from around the district to come to the train for either the afternoon or evening classes. Some even did both, afternoon and evening, if they were very keen. Occasionally you'd have people that would follow the train, would go to the next stop as well. They may live, it might be that they live in an area that's sort of, you've got the 2 towns, one town there, they might live somewhere in the middle and be able to go to either town. The 5 carriages on the train, 3 of them were workshops, and there was also one that had been a workshop. It used to be a photography workshop, but they had to can it because the chemicals kept on getting spilt in bad shunting. And the other one was a generator carriage, so there was a big diesel generator that gave us our 240 volt power. Of the 3 workshops, 2 were changeable, and that was one. It was just an empty carriage, and it was either used for painting, and a whole lot of easels would be delivered to us, or it was textiles, and then there'd be looms and things like that delivered. The other changeable carriage was the one that was used for either leatherwork or silver jewellery, because they had similar needs, bench space, tool hanging space, that sort of thing. The whole time I was on it, all the trips I did, it was silver jewellery. I never had the experience of working with a leatherworker. The other carriage was the pottery carriage, and it was always the pottery carriage because it had four maybe wheels, a couple of kick wheels and a couple of electric wheels. It had an electric kiln, and that was I used that for bisque. And it had a pile of bricks and an LP gas cylinder that we could build a raku kiln with. And that's how we got around the short time span that we're in a town. I would get the making done in the first 2 or 3 days. It would be allowed to dry out. We're using a raku clay, so it was pretty good. I could put it into the kiln fairly wet. The pots would be bisqued, and then the last day that we're in the town, we would have a raku firing, and usually tried to make that a bit of an occasion. We'd make a bit of a day of it, and we'd have food and drink. And a funny little story with that, one of the towns that we went to was fairly religious sort of town, and it was, I can't remember what it may have been Mormon, but they were very, very strict on the rules. And the lady who was coming to the pottery class had really fought hard within her community to actually be able to come to the classes, because the elders didn't really approve of it. And then when I said that we're going to have a raku firing and there'd be food and wine and all that sort of thing, she was very worried that she wouldn't be able to attend. They finally let her come, but only if 2 of the elders could come and basically watch over her and make sure that she didn't enjoy herself too much. So they sat there, literally arms folded on straight back chairs, while we had this raku firing, and people were eating and drinking and that. She was very good, she took part. The elders didn't really say anything or do anything. They were just there, this sort of dark presence. We had the classes afternoon and evening, and that was how it was the first 2 trips I did. And then on the last trip, they asked us, could we do some classes with school kids in the morning? So we were then doing mornings, afternoon and evening classes. And it was quite strange, because the train was basically a tunnel. There's only the one door in, and then there's no windows or anything like that, so you just had this tunnel view all the time. And when we started doing the classes morning, afternoon and evening, it was quite strange, because you kind of shut off from everything when you're inside. And there's one day I can remember at Castlemaine, or Castlemaine as they call it down there. We went in with the kids in the morning, it was a nice sunny day, went in, had the kids there for an hour and a half, and came outside and it got cloudy and wasn't looking too good. By the afternoon it was looking a lot worse. When I came out from the afternoon class, it was absolutely teeming down and really cold. The wind had got up, it was really cold. And then we went off, and we used to go off to a pub somewhere and have dinner and things like that. And yeah, came back and it was clear skies, stars everywhere. So yeah, 4 seasons in one day. And we didn't know about it because we were inside the train. The way that a lot of the tutors worked it, a lot of us were young people that were setting out on our arts career as a way of earning a little bit of money, and still connected to the arts. The structure of it was you were paid a basic pay rate for the tutoring, and it wasn't very good, it was quite poor in fact. But we were paid a living away from home allowance for the time that you were on the train, and that was quite good. None of us actually did what the living away from home allowance was intended for, pay for motels or hotels or something like that. We all camped. So I had an old panel van that had a platform in the back with a mattress on it, and put all my gear underneath. I slept in that. Ross, a jeweller that was on at one stage, had a ute, and he slept in the back of the ute. Hendrick had a Dodge camper van, very well set out. Because the train went through regional areas, a lot of the towns that we went to were on rivers, so we would find a camp spot by the river quite often, and it was really nice. We'd just have a little camp spot between the 3 of us, During the day we could go back to the camp spot if we want, though mostly we just went back at night and spent the morning there and then went back to the train in the morning at some stage. Saw lots of beautiful, beautiful places around Victoria. The trips that I did was, they called one North Central, so we were up just basically straight north of Melbourne and round the wineries area, Rutherglen, all that sort of thing. There was Echuca. Then I did northeast, so we're out sort of under the snowy mountains, very cold. And there's some great little towns there, just out of Corryong. There's a little town now, I can't even think of the name of it, but we were there for 5 days and that was lovely. You could see the snow on the mountains from where the train was. Did a southwest one, which went out as far as Dunkeld, Hamilton. It was good because we had access to the Great Ocean Road from there quite easily. In times off, we would go down there. When the train moved around, we followed it round in our cars because, again, we weren't allowed to sleep on the train. So we followed it round, and sometimes there'd be a 2 or 3 day gap between when you finished at one town and when you started at the next town. And so we'd either stay where we were from the last town if it was interesting, or if we thought that the next town area was going to be much more interesting, we'd go there and kind of suss it out, find a camp spot, but have a look around at anything that might be around that area. One of the really lovely things about doing this was the people. A lot of the people were really, really nice and would invite us to their homes, feed us and show us their way of life. So got to see a lot of how some farms operated. We had one family in particular in a very small town again that I can't remember the name of, out round sort of Ballarat area. The lady was doing the silver jewellery course and her daughter was doing the pottery course with me. We didn't camp in caravan parks or anything, so we quite often didn't have access to a shower, for example. And we kind of let that be known to the classes at times. And this particular family, they said, oh, come round, you can have a shower, come round tomorrow before class. So we did that and it was really nice. We went round, had a shower, and had a chat, had a cup of tea or whatever. And the next day they said, oh, why don't you come round for dinner between the two classes? And said, yeah, okay. So we went round, we had dinner, it was very formal, sat in the dining room, husband, wife, daughter, all sitting up nicely and everything. Then the next night they said, oh look, we're going out, we'll be out for a little while, but we'll leave the key under the doormat and you can go in and have a shower and wait for us to come back and we'll have dinner again. And this time it was much more casual. We're in the lounge room watching telly and eating off our laps. And it was fantastic. They were really nice. And the daughter was actually back home on holidays. She was normally in Ballarat doing her teacher training. And she asked all of us, she said, look, when you're passing through, when you finish your stint on the train, if you're passing through Ballarat and want a place to stay, call in. And she gave us her address and everything. And I actually did go there and it was really nice. She was in a share house with other students and whatnot. But it was great. They fed me and everything. And it was really nice to catch up with her again. The train went out for 3 months each trip. But the powers that be didn't like having just the same 3 tutors for that 3 months. So they would rotate the tutors. And you usually only hired for a month at a time. If you're very lucky and they couldn't get anyone else, sometimes you'd get the first month and the last month of a trip. But normally you would only just get 1 month somewhere in that 3 months. Quite a few of the tutors were young artists setting out. There were a few more established ones. But I had really good time with the tutors that were on at the times that I was. The first 2 trips, the same guy was doing the silver jewellery, and that was Hendrick Forster. He was great, and he taught me I made this little ring with him. He taught me some lost wax casting. He went on to be quite well known. He produced part of Australia's present to Lady Di for her wedding, and it was a silver cutlery service with red gum handles. Hendrick loved red gum. Hendrick was an Austrian fellow. Everything had to be in its place. He really didn't like things being messed up. Everything had to be in its place and put away properly, and everything had to be just so in his carriage. When one of the textiles tutors arrived from the north coast of New South Wales, Abby, really full-on hippie lady, flowing hair, flowing clothes, mad kelpie dog, mad husband. Hendrick just didn't know how to take her. I can remember we were sitting on the side steps and we knew this lady was coming this day. Old Holden station wagon turned up. Abby got out, walked around the back and flipped the back down. Out tumbled this dog and this bags of textiles. Husband came out with his fringed leather coat, hair flowing everywhere, straight away, peace man. And Hendrick was just, oh no, what is happening here? And he basically ushered Abby into her carriage, and later that day he came and saw her and he said, you will not step foot in my carriage, the silver carriage. You can go through the ceramics carriage if John allows you, but you're not to go through my carriage. He meant it, and he enforced it. He would not let Abby inside his carriage because she'd be touching things, he'd seen her come into my carriage and do that, touching things, putting things down, putting various things that she had hanging off her over the backs of racks and all sorts of things. So poor old Hendrick couldn't cope with Abby. Abby was good fun though, she was great. She was very freewheeling, very open. She just loved talking and having a chat. When we were camping, she would just regale us with stories of their place. I actually went and visited her on the north coast. They had a block of bushland and they had built a 3-sided shed, and that's what they were living in. So it was the hippie dream, but she was great. Another time there was a guy, Peter Kilby, a painter, who was in the carriage that was sometimes textiles, sometimes painting. And I don't think he quite knew how to take the train and its lifestyle. He wasn't real keen on camping. I think he did go into a hotel, stayed in a hotel and drove to the train each day from another town because the town we're in didn't even have a hotel. One of the other things that Hendrick did, we quite often were going to towns that were going to lose their rail line. Vic Rail was going through a period of condensing it down, so they were shutting down a lot of the little branch lines that ran out to a town and terminated there. And one such town was Kahuna, up near the Murray River. And we were there. The train that came and picked up the arts train to take it away again, was going to be the last train to visit Kahuna. So we thought it demanded a bit of a solemn celebration. So Hendrick organised it. He organised us to go into, I can't remember where we went into, it might have even been all the way back to Echuca or somewhere like that, to go to an op shop. We got formal clothes. I had a suit. Abby had a long white, it was actually a wedding dress. Hendrick had a suit on. He got silver cutlery, white tablecloths, and just a little camp table, and we set it up in the middle of the tracks because there was only ever at Kahuna, and this is part of the reason I was shutting it down, there was only ever one train a week came out. So we knew we weren't going to get hit by a train. We had an evening meal there. We had candlelight dinner on the tracks with this beautiful white tablecloth, lace tablecloth, candles and everything, and had this really nice meal. Hendrick was actually a really good cook, so he'd cooked us this very nice meal to have too. The last couple of trips I did, Hendrick wasn't on the train anymore. It was Ross Parkinson, a jeweller. He was from Beechworth, and he had actually bought an old bank, a bank built in the 1800s, 1850 something, and he was in the process still of doing it up. And what he'd done is the downstairs was a gallery which he leased out, and he had his jewellery workshop there. Upstairs in the manager's quarters, he was actually doing that up to back to 1800s style. So he was always on the lookout for things that could go into the bank buildings. And the first thing we would do when we got to a town is cruise around and have a look for things on people's verandas, in their yards. Lots of things like, we got brass beds, we got old Chinese pottery, we got all sorts of things from just driving around having a look. The other thing we would do is go to a tip and have a look there, and again we got brass bed and also some railing that was ornate iron railing. You got ceiling rows from one tip, and the other thing we would look for scrap metal. I can remember we went to Dunkeld, and it's just near the Grampians, and almost straight across from the train station we could see this kind of yard just full of old tractors and old metal stuff, and there was a shed next to it. So he went across, and sure enough there's a sign there, is scrap metal yard. We had a walk around outside, and Ross was rather taken with some of the old tractor seats. They were beautifully ornate, and he was looking in particular for plates too, the plates, manufacturers' plates, because they were actually becoming quite collectible. The fellow came out of the shed and he said, "Oh, what are you looking for?" And Ross said, "Oh, we're just looking for some old stuff now." And he said, "Oh, come in here and have a look. I've got some better stuff that needs to be kept under shelter in here." So we went into the shed and was looking around, and Ross was sort of picking up various objects, and he said, the owner said, think you know what you're doing, don't you? And Ross said, "Yeah." He said, "Okay, come out here to my special shed." And we went out to the special shed, and it was a much smaller shed, and it had lots and lots of these high quality things from lots of the old houses, reasonably priced. Ross ended up buying half a dozen items from him. He got a set of servants' bells. They were on a board, and there was six bells. So because the bank had a servants' quarters out the back, and they would have had a servants' bell for the owner, the manager, to ring to do it, and also down in the servants' quarters. Ross never finished his repairs to that building. Unfortunately, I heard through another friend that I'd made on it that he took his own life a couple of years after I'd travelled with him. I actually went down to Ross's for a couple of weeks at one stage, and he had been teaching me more about lost wax casting, and I had started making some miniature bronzes. And for the bronze we were going to the scrap metal yards, and we would get irrigation pump foot valves because they were a really nice phosphor bronze. I had an exhibition at Von Berto Galleries of my pottery and some drawings, and I made a set of bronzes, miniature bronzes. So I went down for 2 weeks, and Ross helped me put them together, which was great. He was a great guy, but obviously had some problems and couldn't work them out. On one of the trips from Salisbury, I took my dog, Bones. He was only a few months old and hadn't finished growing by any means. He was a German Shepherd Red Setter cross. So he had the sort of the build of a Red Setter, but he had more of the German Shepherd colouring in him. He was quite funny. It was quite cold, get quite cold. This was an autumn trip, and we had a heater, just a little bar heater in the carriage that we used as a kitchen. Bones loved the heater, so he would lie down in front of it. And at the start of the month, he was smaller than the heater. By the end of the month, he was bigger than the heater, and he couldn't work out why. Parts of him were getting cool and other parts were hot. So he'd start barking at the heater as if to say, "Come on, you're not doing your job, heat me up properly." Didn't think to move. He wasn't the brightest of dogs, poor old Bones. Lovely dog, but he wasn't the brightest. He got the setter brain instead of the shepherd brain. Overall, it was a really great experience. You know, when you look at it objectively, travelling around, getting paid, doing something that I liked doing. So that was pretty special just in itself. But the whole experience of meeting with people that were really nice and really interesting to talk to, showed us all sorts of different things. The experience of working with the other tutors was really good. So overall, I loved it, and I wished it had kept going. It stopped going. They had to stop it because the rolling stock just got too old, and I think they had a few shunting accidents and the carriages were damaged, and there's no funds to go back into it. So it ended up just dying. I think they tried to use removalist vans and take stuff around to community centres to replace the train, but I don't think it lasted very long.